let's get started. And our first question for the panel is about the nefarious nature of novels. Why do we like to read about nefarious events and behaviour? How have crime, mystery, thrillers become comfort reading for a large readership? Is it the puzzle, wanting to crack the mystery? Is it the familiarity of the genre that it provides in uncertain times? Is it about making sense out of things through tragedy? What are your thoughts? I'll pass to Anne.
Gosh, that's such a huge question. I think it's a lot of things. I think, yes, it's the puzzle-solving aspect. I think we often like to read things which don't happen in our own lives. Well, I certainly hope they don't happen in your life. I think we all like the intrigue. I mean, come on, hands up who does the Wordle and wants to figure out that flaming word every day. So I think it's probably a lot of things. And yeah, I think it is a comfort, especially if a novel follows a certain, dare I say it, formula. There is something happens, it's bad, and the bad guys get it, and you try and puzzle it out by the end of the book. So, yeah.
Yes, and I think unlike real life, in books there's often a resolution, and that's quite a comforting thing. And for me, I quite like reading books that keep me guessing, but also with layers and depth. And it's quite rewarding to keep guessing and then come to your own conclusion, and then by the end get proven wrong, but in a satisfying way. So that's what appeals to me.
Oh, yeah, okay. Well, I think we like reading crime novels because they end happily usually. The culprit is always caught, the murderer or whatever, unlike real life, is usually caught, and it gives us a sort of a comforting feeling. I think the reason that Agatha Christie and her mates were so popular after the First World War was that they wrote about a life that people recognised. They wrote about small towns, villages, and Britain is very keen on class, so they liked that part about it too. There was a manor, and there was a butler, and there was the lord of the manor, and so on. So I think they found it comforting, and then they evolved from that, and I guess they provide excitement and danger and all that sort of thing at a remove. We just read about it, we don't actually engage in it.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the case, isn't it? I agree. So just thinking about that and thinking about crime, what role does pace play when you're writing? How do you introduce and develop characters at the same time as furthering the plot and maintaining suspense?
To me, that really comes to the editing phase. With Miracle, I wrote it really quickly, and it was sort of bare bones and mainly dialogue. And then I went back and fleshed it all out, so it was way too long and too slow. So then it was a process of restructuring and making sure that the action started right at the beginning, and that the plot was fast when it needed to be fast, and slower when the reader needs to have a bit of a break. Yeah.
Would you like to answer that?
No.
I think it's the pacing is something which I found was one of the hardest things, because when you know that your reader has to know something there, but you know it there, and you think, oh, how do I let them, and just trying to get that, that to work when you know everything is actually quite hard. But it's just something I kept working and working on. But the pacing is it's incredible. It's the same thing like you were saying with, you've got to slow it up and then you've got to speed it, and then, yeah.
So when you start writing, do you have the whole plot in your head? So you've got that whole story?
No, I only know about 2 pages ahead, really. And it doesn't worry me at all. Because it always happens. And if I don't get the whole thing right, Mary will tell me. And then I will get it right. But I was listening to an interview with Ian Rankin by Kim Hill a year or so ago, and he said the same. He doesn't know 2 pages in after that. He doesn't really know where he's going, but he kind of trusts. And I guess that's what we all do. We trust that we're going to get there. The story will reveal itself to us if we work hard enough.
So it's a bit like the person reading it. We have it revealed to us as we're reading, and you're having it revealed to you as you're writing.
Yes.
I love that.
Yes.
That's great. Yeah, lovely. So we're now going to invite Renée to talk a little bit about Blood Matters and read us a little extract from it.
Well, Blood Matters is set in Porohiwi, a small town, about 5,000 in population. I've lived in 2 small towns, Wairoa and Otaki, and there's lots of, and they both had a river, and so does Porohiwi. I use the name because it's an ancestral name, and in Blood Matters, the book is centred around a second-hand shop, and what happens there and what happens outside. And I just enjoy revealing bits of a small town that we don't always think about. And there is sort of as real bad crime happens in small towns just as the way it does in cities. So it's an interesting sort of thing when you think about everyone knowing everyone, but they don't really know them. It's an interesting kind of thing to play with. And of course I like dialogue, so that I use that as the way of revealing stuff.
That's great. So do you think that having been a playwright helps with writing dialogue in your novels?
I don't know. I think I'll just skite and say I think I write good dialogue anyway.
I agree. I think you do.
I just think it's to do with theatre,
Yeah.
and to do with the fact that when I was a kid, no one really spoke to the kids, and so you had a lot of time watching adults, and you watch their faces and you listen to their words, and you really learn the value of the silences in between, and I liked that. I just liked that kind of effect, that you have to really be careful about how many words you use and what the silences are between them.
Yeah, I think that's a great observation. Would you like to read an extract or?
Okay.
Great, thank you.
I've got it written big on paper because I'm losing my sight.
That's okay, I've done the same.
This is when the 3 main characters are on the road. Putti is driving the car, a 10-year-old Bella Rose is in the back, and Jojo is in the front. She's sitting beside, she's the local constable. A glaring searchlight beamed through the spitting rain, and the car was raked by lighthouse strength headlights. The fierce blaze was like a blow. Then it went black. Putti just had time to think someone had made a mistake when they switched the light on, and when the light switch invaded the car again, and the revs got louder. It was like being trapped in a hard, shiny tunnel of overwhelming, head-piercing sound. She turned her head quickly, tried to see the driver, but it was impossible. Must be them, Bella Rose didn't muck around. She didn't sound scared. She sounded excited. Jojo took a quick look in the mirror. Mazda RX-7 looks red. She tapped on her phone and began checking the lights. The phone, 90s, I think. Behind them, the car revved up right on their bumper. Full headlights filled the car with harsh lights that flicked on and off. Then repeated loud revs, foot easing off, foot hard on. Fuck this, said Putti. She peered quickly in the rear vision mirror and at the red car. Listen, Bella Rose, this is just to scare the shit out of us kind of thing, but they need to know I'm not having it. 2 cars were approaching on the other side of the road. The car behind Putti's had already eased back and stopped the excess light. But as soon as the cars passed out of the sight, it started up again. Putty took another quick look in the rear vision, then said, "OK, Bellerose, seatbelt? Yep. Hold tight, take my phone. If we get into trouble, ring Auden. Before you do anything else, understand? Yep. Now." Putty waited 2 beats, then shouted, "Whoop, whoop," and with her left hand on the horn, right hand on the wheel, pulled a swift, hard right and screamed over to the other side of the road. As she turned the wheel back sharply in another perfect U-E, she kept her foot down, came up behind the red car, one hand on the horn, blaring defiance. "See how you like it, fuckers," she yelled as she flicked the lights on full beam. "Rego," she shouted. Jojo was already peering at it. "Taking it off," she said. The driver of the red Mazda turned their lights off, put their foot down. Putty slowed. A few moments later, sorry, oh, I got it. A few moments later, they'd pulled ahead and they saw pinpoints of a light as the headlights were turned back on again. 2 cars appeared on the other side, dipped their lights. She dipped hers. There was a smile on Jojo's face. "Well, well, well." Putty's voice shook a little. "That's the good thing about living with 2 older boy cousins," she said. "You learn to play dirty."
I love Putty. She's such a great character and she's a real wahine toa. And I think that really shows that in that description. She's great. Thinking about Porohiwi and also Burunga, am I saying it right, Jennifer? I was wondering about how you convey place in a novel and how you choose to set it in a real place like Anne has with Wellington for The Leaning Man, or a fictional place as Jennifer and Renée have. Have you got any thoughts on that about creating place and its importance in the novel?
Well, my story starts, there's a really big earthquake and it's set in Australia, and the only place I could think of that had had a really big earthquake was Newcastle in New South Wales, but that's too big a town and I wanted a small town. So I thought a fictional town allows you to make a town that suits the story. So I could have Heller's Plastics and the Twirly Swirl Biscuit Factory and Parsons Cigarettes, and there's no fact-checking required. It can all be part of the story. But also in reading Anne's book, I could see the value of having it, in Wellington, and it's so nice to be seeing the streets and to be in Mount Victoria, and so I can see the value of both. But yeah.
Place for me was really, really important in that, and I'm not comparing myself with Ian Rankin for 1 minute, but I love the way that he sets things in Edinburgh, and you can go on Ian Rankin tours, and I'm not familiar with Edinburgh, but I love reading about another place that I could visit if I wanted to. So I sort of thought, I wonder if I could do that with Wellington and actually set it here and have it really recognisable. So there's pros with that, because if you want to check something out, you just go on, There's also cons, because you have to get it right. And I had quite a pivotal scene set in the Hummingbird Cafe, and about 3 weeks before this went to print, Hummingbird shut down. And I was like, are you kidding me? And I think it was Sarah Bolin who mentioned it to me, and I was like, oh, you're kidding. And so I had to quickly, change the thing, because the first thing anybody's going to do is tell you when you got something wrong. And I had a chap who was utterly convinced that he'd been to the nightclub, and I had to say to him, that's great, but that is actually a figment of my imagination. So there's a bit of both in there, but setting was, I definitely wanted it to be recognisably Wellington. So if I've done that, then that's great. Yeah.
I think it's wonderful to read about your own city and recognise the places and be part of that story that's coming, together, and just the role of the leaning man, such an iconic part of Wellington. It's lovely to see that in a novel. What about you, Renee, for Porohiwi? Was that because that was also the setting for your other novel, wasn't it? And it almost becomes like a character in itself.
Yes, in a way.
Yeah.
I remember, all the places and stuff like that. Yeah, it does become real in my head, and it's. I think it's just gives you a sense of place and a sense of what is where, and you can feel quite comfortable about people moving around in it.
Yeah.
And most little places in New Zealand have a main street.
That's right. And I think we've all been to those towns that have got the river running through it and beside it. So, yeah, it was great. Okay, we're now going to invite Jennifer to read a little bit about tell us a little bit about Miracle and read an extract for us. So, kia ora.
Okay, so the story centres around a 14-year-old who was called Miracle because she's born in the middle of an earthquake. And she survives the quake unscathed, unlike her brother who never stopped shaking. And the trouble starts when their dad gets a job at the local crematorium, which is being blamed for a high death rate that's seemingly quite unnatural. Miracle's classmates start tormenting her, and two boys play a cruel trick on her that triggers some devastating events. Miracle's dad is arrested and her world turns upside down. And to avoid any spoilers, I'm going to start from the beginning, and I'll just edit it slightly to keep it short. And I need my glasses. Remembering that knock at the door still makes me shudder. It wasn't actually a knock. A knock is the gentle tap, tap, tap of your auntie dropping off a still warm cottage pie she's cooked for your tea, or your nana if she's driven all the way from Sydney for the weekend without dying from a stroke. This was a bash, bash, bash that made my whole body jolt, as if I'd just run smack bang into an electric fence. A bash, bash, bash that left my skin all shivery and bumpy. By the time I reached the hallway, Mum had fumbled through all the locks and was holding the front door open, her hand gripping its edge so tightly her knuckles were white. "Is James Jamison home?" a man's voice asked. I knew who it belonged to before I saw the black boots on the doormat, one shiny, one splattered in grey mud. I somehow knew this was a cop's voice, even though I couldn't remember hearing one in real life before. The legs of the cop it belonged to were 2 inches longer than his navy blue trousers, and his bald head, glistening under the porch light, was as round as a ping-pong ball. Under his arm was a hat with a silver badge. "Jim's here, yes. Why? What do you want Jim for?" Mum held her dressing gown tightly around herself with one hand. Her other hand still clung to the front door, as if she was ready to slam it. Dad must have heard the cop's voice. The bedroom door squeaked open, and Mum and I turned to see him emerge. Trudging along the hallway, he looked less like Dad, and more like a man who'd done something really bad. His face was grey in the dull hall light. His hair was flat on one side, and his crumpled work shirt hung halfway to his knees. I wish he'd bothered to put his trousers on. For some reason, his legs, thick, pale, hairy, made him look guilty. I can't remember what happened next. Did Dad go back inside to put his jeans on? Surely he didn't go to the station in his blue undies. It was so cold I'd forced 2 tracksuit tops on over my nightie. Did Dad call out a goodbye to Julian? Not that Jules would have heard. He would have been hiding under his bed with his fingers jammed in his ears. Did he mess up my hair? Kiss Mum's cheek? It's all a blur. All I can remember is him following Constable Kelly across the 1, 2, 3, 4 stepping stones that joined our front veranda to our driveway, and thinking, I've really done it now.
When I read the novel, I was thinking that I've really done it now at the end of that first chapter was amazing. It was a really good hook in to the novel. And the other thing I was thinking was, when you're trying to capture an authentic voice for characters like Miracle or Gracie that are kids, Does that change the way that you're, well, obviously it does, but, what does it mean for you when you're writing from a child's point of view? Is there anything that you do to get into that character while you're writing, and kind of what is your relationship with that child protagonist?
Well, I've been asked this question quite a lot now. The young voice comes quite naturally to me, and I've got two theories about why that is. And one is that when I was aged 12 to 14 or 15, that was a time in my life when I read the most books. So I think it was a more richer time of my life, and that's firmly ingrained in my mind. So that's one theory. And the other theory is that I haven't grown up yet.
I love it.
But Miracle is 2 years older than Gracie, who was in my other book, so I am growing up, but slowly.
So in the next novel...
Actually, I've got adults in my next novel, so yeah.
That's great. And also, I was just thinking that the common thing for all of your novels is having that really strong female protagonist. So, how important was it for you to have a young woman or women as your protagonists?
I didn't think of doing anything else, in that I felt very comfortable writing from a female perspective. Having said that, she's not the least bit like me, and that was the really fun bit, because she's quite foul-mouthed in a lot of ways, and I am sorry about that. But she says things that I wish I could say, or she's much braver than me in that sense, and so it's kind of like an alter ego who's going to go and fight on your behalf or something, and so that was I enjoyed that. But as far as being female, wasn't an option. Yeah.
Yeah, and I suppose I wanted a strong female character because they're the kind of characters I like reading about and would like my daughters to read about. And there's probably already plenty of stories about men, and it just seemed like a natural and enjoyable point of view.
Yeah. And I've already said about my great love for Putty. Was she a character that you thought about a lot before starting to write? Oh, sorry. I've already said that I really love Putty as a character. Was she somebody that you thought about a lot before you started writing, as a female takatapui character?
No, I called her after my great-grandmother, but that's about the only thing I knew beforehand. I mean, she grew on the page. I don't think I've had some good male characters and some bad male characters in my books, but I think most of them have, all of them have female protagonists, and I guess it's, I've never thought of doing anything else because I'm female, and so I see the world from perhaps a different viewpoint, and then you just put yourself into the head of another female, I guess. That's probably it, really.
No, it's great because so often we see women as the victims in crime novels, and it's really great when you see the women as
No, they've always been heroes.
Yes, exactly.
Anyway,
nice to see them as heroes. It's great. So now we'll invite Anne to talk a little bit about The Leaning Man and read us an extract. Thank you.
So this is The Leaning Man, and it's named for a lot of reasons. But one is the sculpture on the wharf of the Solace in the Wind is what that's actually called, and I love it. So that sort of became a symbol in a way throughout the novel. But my main character is Stella. She's ex-police here in New Zealand. She kind of left in disgrace, went to the UK. She's come back. She's in her early 30s. She's come back for her parents' 40th wedding anniversary. But that same night, and this is not really too much of a spoiler, her friend dies in a suspected suicide. She's convinced it's not, and sets about trying to figure out what on earth has gone on. bit that I want to read is actually, I kind of chose it also because it's got libraries in it. I'm very fond of libraries. It's got libraries in it. And, but also it's just got that sense of disjointedness, which I wanted Stella to have as somebody who, Wellington is familiar, but she doesn't quite feel at home and she doesn't know where she belongs and she's just trying to sort her shit out, basically. So, glasses as well. Here we go. Stella cut through Civic Square past the gallery. The place was mostly empty at this hour, just the occasional tourist or a mum with a buggy. A man was sitting on one of the benches with a violin case resting next to him. From the pocket of his rumpled suit jacket, he pulled out a few last crumbs for the pigeons. The elegant silver fern ball that hung suspended over the square glinted in the morning sun, a sculpture of simple beauty held by wires that, in certain light, remained invisible. In a flash, the ball was replaced by D at the end of a rope. Oh, shit, thought Stella. She's following me. Like a Shakespearean ghost, she's there. She's always going to be there. I am never going to get away from that image. The pigeons had huddled in a group at the violinist's feet, pecking at whatever they thought might be food. A ragged orchestra of cooing and warbling, strutting fluffed-out feathers. London pigeons, Wellington pigeons, or the pigeons in Rome, they're all flying rats, she thought, and shuddered. He shouldn't be feeding them. They're a bloody nuisance. She walked past, close enough to momentarily unsettle the flock. He didn't look up, but waited for the birds to settle again before sprinkling a few more crumbs on the ground. She carried on around the boarded-up old library, through the alley past Unity and along Custom House Quay to the new library hub on Panama Street. Through the doors, the smell of coffee hit her first, then the noise, air conditioning, computers, the hiss of steam, the clatter of cups in the cafe, all added to the ambient sound. Cafe tables were dotted with open laptops, their owners pecking away at the keyboards in between sips of strong coffee. A brace of mums towing toddlers and bags of books made their way to the kids section. Almost every available armchair was taken already by magazine readers there for the duration. A couple of tables over by the windows were home to students, and the sound of children playing came from the other end. Stella looked around in case she could spot her aunt. "Hi, I'm after Rita Stewart," Stella said to the young chap at the information desk, trying to look at his eyes rather than the spectacular handlebar moustache he wore. Even though this hub was new, the familiarity of the place hit her. This was her city, her streets, and it had been her home once. She wasn't even sure what or where home was anymore, London or here. Wasn't it meant to be where the heart is? She closed her eyes. Her shoulders were stiffening up. That massage had helped, but it also stirred up a whole lot of crap, a bit like being back here. The past doesn't leave you, she thought. It just sometimes takes a whole while to catch up. It might take a longer route. It might even stop off for a while somewhere sunny, but it still arrives at the door puffing slightly, holding on to an overstuffed suitcase saying, "Remember me?" Stella remembered every detail of exactly why she'd left the country, but the one thing she'd learned was that shit always follows you.
That's wonderful, thank you. And I think that all of us from Wellington City Libraries would have really appreciated that very accurate description of Te Awe, I think, in town and the bustle that goes on in our libraries. And I think you capture Wellington so tremendously well. It's wonderful. And I guess one of the questions I had was, for me, the character of the homeless man, Mad Dog, was kind of almost recognisable from the homeless community that we have in Wellington, and then that kind of gritty underbelly. How hard was it writing about those things, and what was did you have some kind of impetus to include that kind of realistic side of things?
Very much so, because I think one of the things that interests me is the layer that you see on top, that we all see, and we go, "Oh, yeah, that's nice." And then if you hang around long enough, you see the other side of things. And it's not that far under the surface. We often just don't like to see it. We just perhaps like to pretend it's not there, or we just ignore it. And I I thought, no, I think Wellington's got a bit more going on than all the nice stuff. So having a character like that also meant that the whole descriptions of streets and all of that became more possible as well, to see things also through his eyes and how he was living and how he experienced the city, which is very different from how other people were experiencing the city.
Yeah, no, I loved it when he was walking around Mount Victoria and his description of the streets as he walked around there. And coming out of that, I think, because Stella's returning to a place and Puti's returning to a place and returning to family, and Miracle, her whole story is about her family and coping with, like things that are happening. So how do you think that natural tension that happens within families kind of seems to suit crime novels? Because, like you're saying, there's things hidden underneath and secrets that we're discovering. What are your thoughts on families as a part of crime novels?
Well, I suppose we all have them, don't we? All have families, and I guess those are perhaps the people we might know the best, and also I think being in a small place, you have more chance of getting to know people. It's almost like the bunch of people you know in that town are sort of family, and you talk about this and that, and you can easily imagine things happening. It's kind of inevitable, I think, for a writer anyway, to put people they know into imaginary situations, and so you can play around with that a bit. And I think too that once the character starts getting into your head, they sort of suggest things themselves. I mean, I loved the homeless man, and I just didn't want anything bad to happen to him. Damn it! And and of course, I think with Miracle, I mean, she's got a home and all that, but she feels sort of lost in a way at times in the story, doesn't she? So I think we all play with that idea of what's behind the facade, that other people see.
Oh, well, I agree with what Renee's saying. But, in Miracle, it starts with she's very sort of embarrassed by her family. It's a very dysfunctional family. But they're the most important thing to her, and it's her love for her family that drives her to do everything she can, especially because her friendships are quite fickle and her friends aren't around when she needs them. But then she later realises that her friends' families have their own secrets, so,
just to add to that, I think what families do, well, what I've found with this is that they are the people that comment on you, or that you understand, like you understand Stella, I think, more when you see her interactions with her family. And so they're kind of like, it looks like a mirror, but they kind of bounce ideas off, and you get a sense of their place in the world through their place in the family.
Yeah, I love that thought that we've all got families and we've all got family secrets, and what I was thinking, Renee, with your Blood Matters, how important was you to have that? Was it to you to have that Māori voice and representing Te Ao Māori? Because I know that for me, reading that, it was just so wonderful to be able to read, about characters that were familiar to me. Yeah,
there'd be no point, would there, in writing about a small town in New Zealand? Yeah, you cannot. Yeah. Well, people do, of course. People write. They do write books without any. They're set in New Zealand, but there's no Maori in them. I suppose so, but it's you cannot really. I mean, I wouldn't want to anyway. Yeah. But what I wanted to show with Puti was the everyday sort of casual racism that people don't even see. and they don't even understand what they're saying. And I just wanted to show how easily and carelessly that can happen. So I do in a few incidents. But it's a very interesting thing that I mean, I'm really lucky because I've got a mixture, and so I feel very free to move around in that mixture. And but I guess maybe sometimes people feel a bit shy or something. I don't really know. I don't think, however, that it's wrong. I think it's wrong to ignore that.
Absolutely, yeah. I love it in Blood Matters when the customer comes into the bookshop and wants to know where the owner is, and there's Putty, and she's there now, and she's running the bookshop, and I love that. I love that when it's
just his assumption.
Yes,
that
exactly.
she's female and she's Maori, so she cannot possibly be the manager. It's you meet that kind of thing. I worked in a second-hand bookshop for a while in Auckland, and people's ideas are extremely interesting, let me say. The only thing we ever had stolen in that shop, though, was a Bible.
There's something mixed up going on there if someone's stealing Bibles.
Yeah, it was a very beautiful, a leather-bound, it was a beautiful piece of art. But so I guess that's probably why they stole it. But well, I hardly think it would be spiritual, would it?
But it is interesting how books become so important to people that it is something that they feel like that they want to own and keep and have and take away and look at and return to. So it's the strength of the book, isn't it?
Yes.
The other thing about Blood Matters was that I really enjoyed was the inclusion of COVID. COVID was almost like another character as part of it, and it was really great to read a novel so contemporary. And for example, when Putty asks Bella Rose how it was going back to school after lockdown, and that must have been enjoyable to write.
Well, I couldn't really ignore it, and we all, either suffered or just rode through it or whatever happened to us all. But I do remember not having to, or the time when you could choose if you were going into a crowded place or whatever, which is still the case. And I just wanted some of my characters, some part of Porohiwi anyway, to have lived through that, to reflect what we all felt. And Mary was a great help in that because I'd forgotten some things about it. She's a really great reader and editor. So, I mean, in a way, it would have been. I would have made a couple of real howlers if it hadn't been for her eagle eye. I mean, it's amazing to me that we lived through those couple of years or whatever it was. And then you forget the details, you forget the actual date that it started on and stuff like that, and you have to look it up. I guess it probably happens to all of us that we do.
So the value of having a good editor is obviously really important to writers. If you're writing crime, do you think that the need for editing to keep everything not realistic, but keeping that timeline going, picking up on errors, is that more important in a crime novel where detail matters? What do you think?
I think it's important in any novel because you've got to get all your ducks in line or somebody's going to read it and go, well, that didn't happen then, because, But for me, the editing process was... was fantastic. No, it was really, really good. It's stressful because you go, but this is a whole lot better because it was edited, because it was read by people who kept an eagle eye on things and made sure that everything was in place and just noticed stuff that... Because the thing is, you've got this whole story in your head and you're not reading it as a reader, you're reading it knowing everything, and you're just so sick of it by the end of it. I mean, I was. But, so to have somebody who's got fresh eyes who can just go, yeah, that's... is incredible. I wouldn't... I wouldn't try and put anything out unless it had gone through an editor. I just wouldn't. Yeah.
Yes, I'd agree with that. And I had the same editor with my first novel, and I requested the same one for the second one because she really knew my writing. And the publisher said her brief was, please cut the word count. And so we managed to get 5,000 words out, which was pretty amazing. But it's just, their eye is just so valuable. And she could also point out, and this is sort of the pacing thing, where something that I thought was a funny little anecdote was really slowing down something that was meant to be faster. So, yeah, just having someone point these things out was just very valuable.
Yes, I mean, it's part of the process. And I mean, although I probably live for the day when Mary will say there are no edits, I know that is a dream and it will never happen. I don't think that a writer, I think, well, speaking for myself, I'm probably too close to it. And I think my eyes slide over the words, and I assume sometimes that what I've done is what I meant to do, and it's not. So, I mean, the value of a good editor is just beyond, it's every writer's dream to have a good one, and I was just lucky.
If you look in the back of most really good novels, or even not just any novel, you will see that the novelist invariably thanks their editor. They should do anyway. But a lot of them do. They will mention their editor by name because, they're just an incredibly important part of the process.
Oh, that's great. And it sounds like all three of you have had really good editors, which, that's a treasure. It's
I've had some... I've had two extremely good editors, and I've had others who, when I compare them to those two, were not really as careful. And I don't mean they were careless or anything like that. I just mean they just didn't latch on to stuff that perhaps one never goes back and reads what one has written. It's just too scary. But, I can tell if I'm asked for an extract or something like that and you have to type it out onto the computer, you can just see what you should have or could have done if they'd pointed it out. Yeah.
Oh, well, hail all the editors. I was just thinking, Jennifer, what was the experience like writing about Australia from New Zealand? And did the distance make it easier to conjure up Australia or a little bit harder? How was it?
It definitely made it easier. I've actually lived in New Zealand for longer than I lived in Australia, but I think it's because I grew up there that when I sit down to write, that's what I see. And it could also be the young narrator thing. I just go back to my past. And it just feels, that distance, I can look at it from over here. And I might have to move back to Australia to write about New Zealand. So we'll see if that happens.
So I was just thinking about the nature of crime novels, and it's becoming something that's getting bigger and bigger, as we discussed at the beginning. And I was wondering, in New Zealand, is there a supportive network or community of crime writers? And, do you get support from one another? And do you think that awards like the Ngaio Marsh Awards have made a difference to recognise excellence in crime writing? Because I think quite often what we do is we forget that the writing is often fabulous, as in all three of your books, and sometimes it's secondary to the suspense and the unravelling of the crime. And, I'd like to think that you all feel that you're valued as writers as well as crime novelists. So what do you think of that in terms of the support of the community and the importance of awards like the Ngaio Marsh Award?
I think it's extremely important, and we owe Craig Sisterson a huge vote of thanks because, it's just one person. He's done it all practically on his own, and because he believed in it. And and sometimes crime writing is perceived as second-rate kind of area, and I have no idea why, but it does. And he's made quite a difference, I think, to the viewing of it as just another form of writing. Like the house of writing is a big whare, and there's room for all of us, really, and it's no sense. And I mean, I get annoyed with people who put down romantic fiction as well, because a lot of people love to read it. And why not? I mean, why not? And it takes just as much time and patience and effort to write a romantic love story as it does to write anything else. And yes, I mean, I'm a library person. I've gone to the library as a reader, I mean, from the time I was about 10, and I've read every kind of fiction there is, except when I was quite young, about 10, and the librarian took the book back, and she told me it needed mending, sorry. And it was called something like The Loves of Gerardo or something like that. And she obviously thought maybe not for 10-year-old.
That pretty much covers it for me.
Yes, just back to Craig, who is the founder of the No Marsh Awards. He also organised Aotearoa Noir, which was a festival for crime writing. I think it was just before COVID. And there was talk of making it a regular, like every 2 years or something.
Yeah.
But that was a fantastic event, and there were international writers as well as people from all over New Zealand. And I think it was a sellout. It was just really good. And he does everything from London, including the Mystery in the Library events that he's done over the last few years. So yeah, it's been very good.
Well, luckily we do have time for a few questions from the audience before we wrap up and release our writers back out into the wild. So does anyone have any questions? If you do, raise your hand and I can bring over the microphone. Oh, Neil will take the microphone.
I'll just jump in with my evil/eagle eye. I'm sure Renée said evil eye. Sorry, I'm editor. But I'm just wondering that, the violence that is in each of your novels in some way. There are violent deaths, things happen, right, that aren't good. I haven't got to your second novel yet, Jennifer Lane, but I will. So maybe there isn't. But how do you write that? Is it hard to get in and write those dreadful scenes? Or is it something that you can just do as a writer? Yeah.
I don't really. They usually take place off stage, and I suppose I'm thinking of something else that I'm going to write that will have that in. But I guess, in a way, I write what are called cosy crimes or whatever. Cosy noir, I describe them as, and so. Usually they're more about the people, the characters, and there is a crime and there is a murder, but I don't go into all that many details, although in Blood Matters, we do see the dead person, and so we know how violently he died. And as far as writing about that, it's just like writing anything else. It's your imagination. I've never seen anyone who's been murdered, but I do have a vivid imagination, so I just use that. I have a friend who was a very highly regarded theatre sister, and so if I get stuck with anything, I just ask her.
I don't like a lot of blood and guts. I prefer my violence to be suggested. Having said that, there are a couple of fights, and I have to say that for one of them, I remember standing myself up going, okay, so he's got me around the neck, so that means I could do that. And so I literally went through the stages and then write it. And then you think, well, would that work? Does that work? And currently what I'm working on at the moment, I've engaged the help of my almost 16-year-old son who does a martial arts form called Krav Maga, which is what Mossad use. So I've asked him, I've said, now if someone's got you like this, how would you... And he's very helpful with all the details. So that's kind of more... but it's still not the blood and guts and having no, I don't go for a lot of that, so...
Very similar to Renee, all of my violence happens off scene as well. And I was very careful because something bad does happen, Mary. And Miracle does see the person after it's happened, but she quite deliberately only describes a small thing, and so everything else is left to the reader's imagination, and
which is good.
Which is what I preferred to do myself.
Well, I'm very sad to have to wrap everything up because I feel we could go on for at least another hour talking and listening to you. So, ngā mihi kia koutou katoa. Thank you for coming along and sharing your whakaaro about writing and about your novels. We're going to have signings and we've got another chapter here, selling books down the back, and we've also got some refreshments. So if everyone would like to chat to the authors, but before we do, we're just going to hand over to Mary, who's going to say a few words, and I think then maybe Renee and Mary and Renee's whānau will waiata us out. So kia ora koutou, thank you for coming along, and thank you to the staff here at Newtown Library and the Wellington City Libraries staff that have come along to support this tonight. So kia ora koutou.